Yeah, we were just starting off sharing a bit about what interests us in joining the call today around conflict and microsolidarity in particular, like what's the overlap there, how is conflict showing up in our communities. So yeah, Caleb and Ondrej just shared, and Victor, I wonder if you also want to share something, and James, if there's something coming up for you now, feel free to share when you're ready.
Whilst I'll settle in, I'll give space to James.
Sure.
Conflict. I just got back a couple days ago from a gathering called Village Playground Gathering outside of Toronto with about 60, 70 folks, and is open space, but running through people talking about rupture and repair. So, similar, touching the space. I think conflict is a feeling. That's my orientation, my basic approach. Conflict is a feeling. It lives in our nervous systems. But the impacts of how we hold that feeling and what we do with that feeling and the words, the communications, the behaviors, and the relationship impacts of what when we can and can't hold those feelings and remain in connection, lead to togetherness or rupture and the potential for repair or not. And so yeah, that's yeah, present.
Awesome. Thanks, James. Yeah, I love that question. Actually, it already brings up the question, what does conflict mean to us? So how do we define it? So it was nice to hear your take on that. Victor, do you want to share anything about what interests you on the topic today?
I am here because folks like Jocelyn hold space in Microsolidarity monthly meetings. And I didn't know what I was coming into. So like that is why I am here. It has nothing to do with the topic. Um, but with respect to the topic, like I care I care a lot about like looking at what's available, in this direction, you know. I mean, all of my life, like when I was a child, like I recall like conflict being something that wasn't really welcomed, and I was unsure how to manage it, and grew up wanting to like avoid it, and importing that into my, 20-year marriage, and like that probably being one of the reasons why, like, well, I suffered for a long time and like wasn't able to sort of like be in relationship the way that I wanted. So now that I'm out of that relationship, I get to be like in a relationship where like there's high trust and where disclosure and all that kind of, and it's staying in the conflict has been, I think, a really important, I mean, possibly the most intimacy building part of our relationship, because I don't know, it's really been lovely to be able to look at what's actually present without, and to share it and to do, like to look at it together, to not be feel threatened by it. Um, yeah, I don't know. So I'm very pro conflict, very, very good. It can be, I think that healthy conflict is like a really significant part of relationship.
Thanks for sharing, Victor. Yeah, there's something you said there about like you're now in a high trust relationship, and it made me think in microsolidarity we are often focusing on building trust and creating that sense of belonging, and yet it's inevitable that at some point rupture will happen. James was mentioning rupture and repair. Rupture will happen if we're spending enough time with each other, or going deep enough into vulnerability, or working on things that really matter to us, which is also part of microsolidarity, like working on creating meaningful work together. And knowing what creates the rupture and like knowing how to repair, I find it a crucial aspect of community building or creating groups. Even as you said, Victor, like in a one-on-one relationship, it's also the microsolidarity unit of a dyad. Yeah, I was for those of you who just arrived or didn't catch at the beginning, I have some loose idea of what we could do today. I wanted to explore this topic because as a mediator myself, I also have been I've been working with this for a few years, and I've become very curious. What do we mean? What does a microsolidarity approach to conflict look like or mean? And I have some thoughts on it, but I thought we could also just jam on that together. So it's really nice to hear a little bit what your curiosities are. I would open the round for a little bit more. I'll also share myself first because something that you said, Victor, also made me reflect on my own journey with conflict, which is also starting very avoidant. I think in our family, we really valued seeing ourselves as harmonious, and we have a Telegram group called the Happy People. It's very positivity representing, but when there was conflict, it was quite scary, and it sort of I always thought conflict means the end of something, or something's broken. And I went quite deeply into learning nonviolent communication. I think in order to learn how to first avoid conflict happening. So I learned to be very empathic and trying to make spaces very, very safe. But I realized after a while it limited the amount of honesty that I allowed myself to bring in, because I was always wanting to be very receptive and very harmonizing and help everyone sort of come to agreement very quickly. And I think I still held a thing of oh, conflict is scary. Conflict means something bad has happened. Let's try and keep the peace. And eventually, over time, I've started to become more confident with it by just having, I think, more experiences of conflict going well, realizing that actually conflict can be something really generative. And now it's more I wouldn't say I'm yet at I can't wait for the next conflict, but because I know it can still be very rough and even traumatizing for many of us who've had bad experiences. So there's a sensitivity and a respect I have for it, but I would definitely say I'm learning to become more confident and learning to see conflict as an opportunity for growth and learning, and more when it's well held can really create sense of more innovation coming out and more diversity of views and experiences coming to the table, which gives us more creative ideas that we might not have thought about before about how to go together to the next step and how to move forwards together. I think it can build a lot of trust when we go through something difficult together and actually learn more deeply what's important to each other. So yeah, I find it a very important aspect of microsolidarity when we're talking about building groups, that it's not always going to be easy. And what do we do when it's hard? What do we do when there's rupture? How do we move towards repair? Yeah, I kind of want to open the space for any further comments around that. And I have a few prompts as well. Does anybody want to comment more on what I just shared, or anything anyone else has shared so far?
Well, one of the things that was happening, or coming, some of the thoughts that were happening for me were reflecting on times of conflict, and noticing that I have the privilege of being in a high trust relationship with James and group, and recalling times when, and I was checking the sense of do I think that that conflict is a feeling, or is it something else? And then trying it on, I could notice a place of tension, right, that kind of led to trying things out, or rather I don't know. I was just reflecting on on conflict in the context of a lived situation that we were in, and wondered how we might proceed in this conversation. I'm open to your invitations. I guess what was coming up is it's possible that we could look at times when maybe conflict went well, or when it didn't, or what was true about circumstances within which it went well, or that's.
You read my mind, Victor. That's exactly where I was imagining going. Yeah. Anyone else want to share something before we head in that direction? Oh. Cool. Yeah, I was thinking maybe we can look at what's been going well in how we address or approach conflict, and what's maybe been still dissatisfying or problematic. in our experiences, and we don't have to like name specific instances if there's sensitive material there. But yeah, maybe you want to reflect, and I'm going to give actually a couple of minutes, even if you want to like journal, to think about this. Let's take 5 minutes actually to just journal about this. What do you, if you think to a community that you're currently involved in, I know you're all four quite integrated into a group at least, and what do you think is going well and what's problematic or unsatisfying in your current approach? Yeah. I'll let you know when 5 minutes has passed. I'll do some notes for myself as well. With yeah, very curious to hear from each of you what you thought, what do you think is going well, and what's maybe problematic, challenging, and maybe it would be great to hear some context of like which group or relational context are you thinking of, just to help us sort of orient and relativize, if that's right with you. Anybody want to start? I'm also happy to begin. I could talk about, I was reflecting on the network itself, on the Microsolidarity network. And I think where it's most obvious how the network responds well or not so well to conflict is showing up when we meet live in person, so like summer camps. And because online it's hard for me to really know for sure. I guess that's one of the challenging things actually, like that, because it's quite a diffuse group of people, and I'm not like it's not possible to be involved in every single relationship. It's hard to know really what's going on and how people respond to conflict. Did you have a question, Victor?
Well, what was coming up is like I feel like the energy is a bit diffuse, and I got curious about whether there was something that prompted the topic to come up. Is there like a situation that like might have led to that? And if that were the case, like I was wondering whether Jocelyn would feel safe enough to like to talk about something that might be like juicy or present. That's what was coming up for me. Thank you for allowing it.
Cool. I feel like I would just continue because I think the diffuseness is maybe just a preamble. But thanks for that. Yeah, something that I think went actually well in seeing how we've responded to conflict is like that there's plenty of, I think what really supports the network in responding to it is that there's a lot of skill in the room often, around like people tend to show up who are quite relationally aware and interested, or see conflict as something to approach with curiosity for the most part. I think there's enough critical mass of a certain culture that's almost role models our relationship with conflict. I think that helps a lot. Like there are definitely things that help, like having structures. Like at the beginning of summer camp, we usually introduce like what to do if you have tension. Like start with self-connection, see if you can get some listening from someone if that's not enough, or approach your pod. And yeah, so we intentionally put people into pod groups so that there's some kind of more trusted, more intimate space where people can connect with one another on a rhythmic, regular basis each day. And I think that really helps if it's clear that that's what the pods are for, or what that they can be. So yeah, I think level of skill and some structure is helpful. Also, I think that there's been some good role modeling from leadership, people in leadership positions. There was a conflict last summer camp, and I saw the way that Rich sort of followed up with that person afterwards, or did his best to sort of go into repair and try and create connection. Role modeled something to me like, oh yeah, we are like proactive. And I think one thing that is maybe problematic is that when people arrive into the network, it's not necessarily clear in terms of writing or information somewhere of this is how we address conflict. I think it's more implicit in how leaders show up and in how people who are more involved with the network show up. We brought up the question for me, like, how important is it that it is made explicit? Like, do we need to write everything in text, create written protocols, or is there something more? Like, I do have this question of like how much can we go into more? Can there be like gestures and signaling? How much can that be enough? I think when it was a certain size, like a network size, it probably is wise to have something written somewhere. But I also don't want to rely only on written stuff. I want to really make sure that the culture is sort of the primary force of bringing that story of how we approach conflict, and the text would just support that rather than the other way around, that we have to all live up to some text or philosophy that we've written. Yeah, something like that is coming up for me as some interest points. Yeah, that's me.
Yeah, like that idea of culture being the primary force, bringing that story of how we approach conflict. It's really, I like that.
Mm.
So I suppose I'm talking about a NGO which I'm a part of here in Slovakia, and what I think has worked for us well in terms of addressing conflicting energy in the group was, first of all, having a conscious, explicit agreement that we want to tend to our relationships. It's one of the principles we want to aspire to. And also framing conflict as something that can be both constructive or destructive. And there's a skill involved in having a constructive conflict, and you can aspire to learn that skill to have that capacity to have a constructive conflict. And in terms of more specific things, I still remember this power conversation which we had earlier this year, which were fish bowls, which was quite intense, but it eventually transformed a lot of that pent-up energy into meaningful action and meaningful structural changes. So having this dedicated space to look at complex things where we have some disagreement, frustration, that really helped. And also what's helping is having space for feedback, like dedicated feedback sessions where we can address all kinds of disagreement and stuff. And what hasn't been working well, sometimes I'm noticing something which I describe as an badly timed, not very well prepared, and ungracefully delivered feedback to other people, which then ends up in, scraps. And I feel like I'm listening to people argue and the logic seems tight, but the energy is antagonistic. And yeah, so this sometimes happens. Yeah, that's it from me.
Thanks, Ondrej. If you captured a few notes in our chat there, and things you wrote, like having conscious agreements, like what are our norms around conflict, having shared understanding about how we want to relate to conflict, like that we want it to be constructive, and it can be constructive, and then having dedicated spaces and times for feedback and disagreements, and also having the opportunity to like all the support to prepare well for it, so it doesn't just come out like blah and be more destructive than constructive. Caleb, I saw you unmuting yourself roughly the same time. I wondered if you wanted to share.
Yes, happy to.
Mm.
So my context is a meditation community, and what's going well, I think, is when conflict has arisen and there's been enough willingness to engage, we've moved through it quite well, and it's created like deeper connection and also understanding, and it's been quite nice. And what a few conflicts, or a big conflict last year and then a medium one this year, led to is we developed like a conflict first aid kit, like these written kind of ways to move through it. And we're planning to launch it soon. And so that feels really good and exciting, and like, okay, we've taken what we've learned from others and what we've learned from navigating these conflicts, and we now kind of have a blueprint where it's not as scary now to embrace the conflict. We've also built trust and capacity, I think, as a leadership crew, where like our connection has deepened through figuring out how to work through these conflicts, which feels really good. What's unsatisfactory is I think there's been a lot of talk about culture, and I think that our community doesn't have a culture of embracing conflict. Similar, I think, to what you shared, Jocelyn, where like we mostly meet in person, but we're decentralized in that we don't have like a space of our own or something, or like we're not having retreats where we're together for multiple days in a row. So I think it can be really easy with the busyness of life to just avoid conflict or turn away from it, especially when people come to a meditation community, I think, for like peace and connection and like, the hope is like the good stuff. And so when the quote unquote bad stuff or difficult stuff comes up, then it's like, oh, I'll just leave now, or like, this isn't the community for me. So I think that there's like, my fear is that there's underlying tensions that are unresolved, either due to like people's just not having the time or capacity to engage with it, or being afraid of it. And I'd really love to be able to create more of a culture around like, this is the practice and this is beautiful and let's do it together. Like this, what an amazing opportunity that we have to explore conflict in relationship around, meditation and our values and like-minded, like-hearted friends. So yeah, trying to figure out like, what do those invitations to embracing conflict look like? How do we integrate it into the culture more without being like, okay, everything's about conflict now. It's like, okay, yeah.
Wow, so great to get a sense of how the context of how you meet can make it difficult to get people to really commit to approaching conflict, because it's easy to leave. That was very interesting to hear. Yeah, but that having a blueprint makes it less scary. I'm really curious I wonder, would you be up for sharing a little bit about what's in your conflict first aid kit? Like, what? Yeah.
Yeah, let me pull it up and see. I haven't published it yet, but I can give you an overview. It's step one is turning within, inviting introspection, mindfulness, and compassion. Step two is seeking a conversation with the option for support from someone that you choose, like a mediator, a friend in the community. Step three is reaching out to the leadership crew if the first two steps didn't lead to a happy reconciliation. And then step four is forming a grievance council where we would have multiple longer term members come together and kind of hear what's going on and provide a recommendation. So we haven't gotten to step 4 before. We've gotten to step 3, and it's like step 4 feels also really good and wholesome, but also like, wow, that's going to be a lot of people involved to like who probably don't want to. Yeah, I don't know. But that's it. Yeah, it's based off a lot of like larger meditation centers of various traditions and kind of how their process works. And
Awesome.
yeah.
Yeah. Something that stands out for me there is actually also even using the language of like going within. It also relates to this meditation community. Like you can create a conflict protocol that embraces the vibe of your group as well.
Mm.
And there's like this clear escalator model is useful as well. Very interesting to see that you heard. I heard you say the fourth, like step 4, the bringing in a whole group and like reviewing how
Mm.
things are working. That it would be exciting. What makes it exciting rather than daunting for you?
I think for me, the exciting part is that there's an end to the steps. Like at a certain point, it needs to have some sort of resolution.
Yeah.
And it feels like that one is like can be widely accepted as being like, okay, I don't know. It feels like it has parallels to like um, other systems that people are familiar with that they'd be like, oh yeah, okay, I can get behind this being like the last thing. But I don't know. I mean, like the hope for us is reconciliation and like insights into the way that, you know, that we're contributing to the conflict, really. So like I don't know, Plum Village, Thich Nhat Hanh's Sangha has like these amazing documents of just like all these reflection questions you can do to approach conflict. But yeah, I think it's just so common to think that the conflict is outside of us and yeah, not even want to do the first step because like, no, it wasn't me. It wasn't me. It was
Yeah,
them, you know?
totally. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Caleb. So rich to hear you. Yeah. I would love to also hear. I know James, you said you got to leave not too long, and we'd love to hear from you as well before you got to go. What's your take?
Yeah. Yeah, as far as specifics, I kind of had to go, or what popped into my mind most concretely was back in my corporate days in corporate world for actual hot conflict. And yeah, or think of it as just kind of like naive or native conflict. Of course, I'd much more like to focus kind of forward in these days and in kind of various liminal web spaces. And once you get into all feelings are welcome kind of spaces, I find that that generally kind of reduces the 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 zone of conflict in terms of the map. And to yeah to come back a little bit more to abstract orienting, my map is kind of like, oh well, if you have difference, and it's okay. If you just have difference, well then like you don't call that conflict. It's just we just have differences and there's no problem with it. There's no, thing that needs to change about it. If we're all okay with it, then we're all okay. But the word conflict comes in when comes that feeling of not okayness. It's not okay. Something needs to change. Something needs to happen. And um, yeah, bringing forth those feelings, being in a dialogue or a coherence or just a sharing, a space sharing, where you can be in the relational zone around the actual object level. There's always something that's happening, something that's happened that's spurred this of something, the actual cause, and then there's the what feelings are we having about it, and what is the impact to the relationship or the consequences in the relationship from the thing that's happening. And I think I've seen, I still, I see a lot more avoidance of that than going headlong, just straight beeline towards that. Even in spaces where we try to cultivate norms of, welcoming everything and being with everything. Um, but but yeah, I find that it's just a lot of what would get termed conflict resolution in my world is just like, oh well, story sharing, and you share your stories, and you can see from the eyes of the other person what's going on, and see what's going on in their story, then a lot of the wrongness or the not okayness kind of just tends to evaporate with that empathy, and you find a way forward. And but yeah, the I think there's this kind of this dark matter. There's this dark matter of the conflicts that you don't know about because silent disconnection happens, and the impact is not shared. The existence is not, in shared awareness there. So. So I view that still as a kind of conflict, or a potential, or a lingering, a stuck conflict, an unresolved conflict when it leads to that kind of silent disconnection. I also believe in positive disconnection, in that, like, oh yeah, we can, and the characteristics that make something a positive disconnection is that we are not turning away from the not okayness and the other person and running away from it, but we're more turning towards something else. So like, okay, I've resolved the not okayness here, but I feel more attracted to go in a different direction. Like, great, go towards that thing, go towards the something else. And yeah, we're not in any obligation to um, repair or reconstitute former relationships, or to be in any particular relationship with anyone, even as a solution to conflict. So yeah, we can end up in healthy or unhealthy disconnection, and in yeah, kind of healthy or unhealthy difference in connection. So yeah, but anyway, so that's kind of my map, my navigating map of, yeah, it's not just the word conflict, but in fact, I don't use that word even much. But yeah, holding and making space for differences. Um, the more I do it, the easier it gets. And the more we do it together, the easier it gets in a space, in a culture, in a community of people. So yeah, I want to keep making that more and more explicit in the norms, and the, yes, writing things down, but also it's just the practice. It's the practice of bringing what's arising, making it into a norm and into an expectation, making it so much easier for then other things to also be brought as they arise. Thanks.
Thanks, James. Yeah, a different angle on looking at what actually constitutes conflict, or conflict in itself, or not okayness, and how do we see difference. Beautiful. Does anybody else want to comment on any of the things that James shared there? I put some notes. I didn't catch everything, but a few few notes in the chat. Yeah.
The thing that stuck out the most for me in that was the, what does, what's the signifier of, or what's an end state? What's an exit, from the situation that's arisen, right? And like appreciating that it does not mean that like um everyone has to like, you know, be in harmony necessarily, or that the that they're that you should be trying to get towards some kind of relational, state, because that's where you need to be in order to be okay. It's more like, well, the energy around this is diffused enough so that like I'm okay to I'm okay to move forward and like to go towards like where we want to go, or something like that. It feels a bit more like um well, in this moment, like my mind stitched together the idea of like consent-based, processes, and viewing the tensions that arise, it might be called conflict, as kind of a signifier of some kind of um objection to what's happened, right? Like I'm just trying this on right now. So like the what I think is a really beautiful um something beautiful about that is that it does not mean that like in order to like register an objection, or to like not be okay, that I have to construct some sort of like logical rationale to defend, to defend it. I can really kind of like state what's present, right? And like use that as some kind of like, there's like other things around it that I think is possible to do in culture, like to view those kind of signals as valuable, right? As like a source of information, right? Um, yeah. So okay, well that's moved through. There was another thought that I wanted to share, and that thought was like, um, I'm not sure exactly how to name this move, but like the move is something like talking about conflict in such a way that it is sort of inherently viewed as like part of a generative process, right? So, the words that came up previously for me were like um, generative responses to conflict, right? Sort of, and that like pointing in the direction of like wanting to have more generative responses to conflict then kind of may lead to intuitions about like what moves are available in order to do that.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Victor. You're talking about moves, and I have the new Microsolidarity card deck here in front of me, and it has 15 blank cards, and there's not many cards or no cards really in the deck about conflict, and I'm like, what would I put on a blank card? What would be a conflict move in the Microsolidarity network? And already quite a few thoughts bubbling up about that. But maybe one, I'm curious in terms of particular moves also about you, James, and what you were sharing. How have you had success in, or what do you think supports people to, like in the communities that you're part of, to develop that like confidence with not okayness, or like to work with not okayness, or to work with disagreement and have come to practice together? Are there ways that you practice together that leads to seeing conflict as a generative thing? Do you have spaces that create that relational zone intentionally, or is it more implicit? What creates this sense of being with not okayness?
There can be a bunch that's implicit kind of in the example modeling of the space holders. We have a mantra, a 3-word mantra of awareness, acceptance, and integrity that is not conflict specific, but contains within it the primary, response of acceptance, welcoming, and being able to turn to that and lean on that is and having that in the like what gets repeated and what gets said and affirmed in the communal spaces is significant. And then also, yeah, having structured spaces for it in the form of meta time, debrief time, balcony time, whatever you call it, but kind of um, intentionally stepping back from the do the thing into the how are we about the things space then creates the space where most of that can actually arise.
Nice. That's super clear. I like that. It also reflects on I think Ondrej or Caleb also said around having, Ondrej, you mentioned something similar around having feedback cycles or like moments to reflect. Yeah, I think that's key. It's almost like there's like the ways to approach conflict that are before conflict happens, like having moves already built in, like is natural, like we naturally reflect on things, so there's naturally spaces to bring it up, there's naturally a sort of culture of reflecting on how we're doing together. It makes it kind of normal to bring up tension. And then there's the things that when tension arises, then there's like the sort of first aid SOS kind of thing and moving towards repair. Yeah, that's great. Thanks, James. Yeah, I love this memorable mantra as well, even if it's not related to conflict, like something that's just sticks in people's minds and it's simple enough. There's those 3 words. It's not like a complicated text or something. It seems like it holds a key to many other things. Yeah, beautiful. Cool. Any other comments or reflections before I hand the floor to Victor about what's working well or not so well in his group project? All right then, we can always come back to this. Yeah, Victor, how about you?
Well, so throughout the like our time, like my mind's gone to like individual relationships or like small groups or like, you know, there's a sustained group over the last like several months that's come together, and so that's like they're present for me too. Well, yeah, I'm noticing that like I'm not kind of able to report, something that's like, a dynamic or practice that's worked well. I don't think I've been in, other than like, the one that I shared at the beginning with like my girlfriend, like, that we're doing really good stuff there. But
I'm also curious about that. I mean, when I say microsolidarity projects that we're
yeah,
reflecting on, like I said, the diet is super important as well, and we can maybe think easily about how we do this as a group. But yeah, if you want to share what structures or what approaches work well for you guys addressing conflict, or what's difficult, makes it more challenging.
yeah. I mean, I'm in this moment like aware. One of my dyadic relationships, like I find challenging and potentially generative, and also like, yeah, often challenging, and noticing the ways in which like uh I've responded to it, and then like I don't know, I think what's happening for me in this conversation is like is just stuff that's maybe like that I don't feel that's that I feel I have conflict about, still sort is kind of like coming up, and it's giving me some time to be with that, and to hear you all and your reflections about ways of approaching conflict. Um, yeah, I can make note of like signifiers that of where like things that I would try to do, or where the things I would try to do to like manage my own experience of being in conflict or tension, like now, is not to just sort of like bottle it up, or to try to flee the situation, but instead like to say directly what I am feeling, say directly what I'm seeing in the other person, and like to kind of create openness. And yet like not everyone is able to respond. I don't My intuition is that it's possible to do those kind of moves in a way that presents something that's more generatively interactable, by the other person. Um, and I think that those kinds of I don't know, the thinking about it that way, I think is significant, because as you observed, Jocelyn, like the people that you're likely to be around in um, uh, microsolidarity gatherings are likely to be those who are at the level of development, whatever that means, so as to be able to interact, maybe with fewer of those affordances given, right? Whether it be by, you know, uh, text, or whether it be by a first aid kit, or like a named space or something like that. All of those are like affordances for um uh all of those are affordances. Yeah. And so like I'm in this I'm curious about that. I'm curious about what kind of affordances can be given, so that like in conditions where you're coming together with people without really knowing already, that you have trust and a dynamic of communication that allows for sort of like giving and receiving, and digesting things generatively, that there might be a yeah I don't know. This relates
Yeah.
to kind of like an earlier question that came up about what does skill look like? And I'm going to guess that what skill looks like doesn't means it doesn't depend on like maybe so many of those affordances being given. This is kind of like
That's a great question.
a framing, but I don't know what it actually means to populate that frame.
Yeah, when I hear you, it sounds like the question is how do I create a generative dialogue when I'm not sure what the other person's skill level is to meet me in a generative way, and can I do that even if they don't have that, you know? And you're right. I think that is one of the sort of ideals of microsolidarity, that you build enough belonging and trust that you can rely on that affordance of kind of knowing each other's sort of patterns and trigger patterns, or how you can expect someone to respond. You build up trust gradually and go through smaller tensions, and so you can address the bigger ones. But you're right, it's not always going to be that way, especially when you start off, or if you're it can be if you're taking a risk to address something with someone who you don't know so well. Yeah, so that question, how do you show up as the generative source or the author of generative dialogue? Yeah, I'm curious if any of us have had or have any thoughts on that, because I hear that question a lot. James, you got to go. Lovely to have you here. Thanks for being around and sharing. Yeah. Ondrej, Caleb.
I'm noticing in this moment, I was going to offer that I notice in this moment I haven't done a lot of reading. So like, you know, while what James named was like having a map or something like that, I noticed that I have kind of like a desire for some sort of like, you know, a relational map or something to use to navigate this kind of territory, so that like, you know, so that it can be talked about in a way that's kind of like consistent and clear and like, yeah, I'm noticing that want.
Yeah, totally. Ondrej, Caleb, anything coming up for you around, like, do you have experiences of like, of this challenge?
Yeah, I think if I'm understanding right, or like what's coming up for me is around patience and feeling like when I have the capacity to be patient with someone, like the amount of my patience kind of can compensate for a skill or capacity that the other person might not have in that moment, and vice versa. So, yeah, like the ability to be patient, to stay calm, to listen feels like a superpower in like leveling the fields when the skills aren't or the capacity isn't matching up. And it can be really difficult, but it's like sometimes I've entered into a conflict where I'm like, okay, do I actually have the capacity to be like, I know I'm going to need to be a lot more patient and like listen way more than the other person. And not because I'm more wrong or something, but just because that's where the capacities lie. And am I ready for that? And vice versa. Yeah, I've been in situations where the other person is so patient and I'm like not. And just recognizing afterwards in that balcony moment of like just the gratitude of how impactful and supportive that can be. So yeah, I don't know if that relates really, but that's what comes up.
Totally. I think it makes a lot of sense. That reflects something to me about almost seeing like a leadership quality in this. Like, if you have a skill, rather than becoming impatient at people who don't have a skill, can you recognize your leadership in the conversation, your leadership as taking responsibility for creating the conditions for a generative dialogue, and that condition might be you being more patient and you being more in the listening. And I think that's that's something of a, yeah, it touches on leadership there for me, like creating taking the responsibility for the conversation. Yeah.
I have a question. This comes of reading a book called like God, it was something about spiritual materialism. Anyway, it's like a Buddhist kind of a book, and in that book, like part of it is discussing the six paramitas.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Do any of you know enough about Buddhism to be able to like interface with that with more skill and depth than I have? Well,
Yeah,
so
maybe a bit.
I can speak to it. I mean, there's in different traditions, there's different amounts. There can be up to 10 or more paramitas, but basically they're wholesome qualities of heart and mind that you can develop that can like patience and loving kindness and things like that. Uh, yeah. So, but I wonder what you're looking for or where you're going with it.
oh, I'm unsure like what I'm looking for. It's really that like the thought came up like, oh, okay, I'm hearing Caleb for like patience. I'm like, wait a minute. Where did I hear that again recently? Like, it was in reference to the Paramitas, and there's like others. So it's like, as far as developing some kind of a capacity that would lend to like, generative responses to conflict or whatever, then like, yes, I can see how there's something about patience. There's others that are here that I see if I just do a Google search, generosity, morality, for whatever that means in this context, patience, diligence, meditative concentration, wisdom, prajna. No. I guess like I'm kind of naming this as somehow relevant to like my map of this territory, right? As like internal conditions to develop in order to have more generative responses to conflict.
Nice. Yeah, I think what it brings to mind for me is there's the four Brahma Viharas, and I think about them a lot in relationship to conflict because it's like loving kindness, compassion, equanimity, and sympathetic joy. And it's like, I think sometimes before I approach a difficult conversation, I'll consider like, okay, which one of these am I going to try and embody? And do I have the capacity to embody it? Coming back to the patience thing, it's like, okay, if there's like a lot of compassion needed from my side in this, do I have the ability actually to embody this compassion right now? And if not, then maybe it's not the right time to address it because I kind of know going into it, it's like, this isn't going to work. Or vice versa, if I'm needing a lot of compassion and the other person I feel is like not ready for that, it's like, okay, me trying to push this is not helpful. Usually I notice that after trying to push it, but
Yeah. What you're saying there is it I like it kind of like around when I do mediation with people, I always do a pre-mediation with them where we spend like at least half an hour like tuning in with how do you want to show up, what do you expect to be difficult, where is your capacity limit going to be reached, or do you expect it to be reached, how could you increase your capacity. Like the preparation for a difficult conversation is, I think, so key, because having a difficult conversation is not like having a regular conversation where it doesn't really matter. So like you're sort of in the flow and it sort of can go organically. You want to be a bit more ready for it, a bit more prepared, a bit more, even having a structure can really help. Deciding on that beforehand, talking about how you're going to have the conversation, just like we were talking before about reflecting on how we have had a meeting or how we have had a conversation or how we have shown up together in the project. Also starting at the beginning, how do we want to show up together can be helpful, and do we have the capacity to do that now, or do we need to call in extra support? I really love the bringing in these principles from practices that are hundreds, thousands of years old. There's also nothing particularly new about this, but yeah, that's what was coming up for me, just riffing off what you were saying. I'm aware also that we are like in microsolidarity, I'm thinking again, what's the microsolidarity approach? And it doesn't have to be a new novel thing. Microsolidarity is also just a conglomeration of many wisdoms, but framed within an intention of increasing our hosting capacity to enable the conditions for people's development and a group to have a great time together, doing meaningful stuff. But like in one of the key models of microsolidarity is the scales. And so I'm really enjoying how we're finding a lot of wisdom in this conversation around like, how do you address a conflict on the level of yourself? Like we've talked a lot about that, like having the right orientation, having the approach of compassion, or like practicing expressing yourself, but you're bringing this also in, Victor, about how do you also enable others to respond in a generative way. How do we approach what James was saying around like not okayness? What's our relationship with not okayness? What's our relationship with conflict before we even amplify out to like, okay, great, this is our decision of how, this is our structure of how we're going to address conflict. It's like on the inside, what orientation do we have towards it? Are we ready? Yeah. I think each scale is good for different things in terms of building belonging and connection, but also good for different things when it comes to addressing conflict. Like the level of self is really good for like addressing what's our relationship to conflict and understanding our history with conflict, our different identities, our different histories, different cultures around facing conflict. And then like the dyad, like really good for listening to one another, like giving each other this listening space. Like Caleb, your first aid kit almost went through a number of scale shifts. Like the second one was I asked for support, or bring in a third person. Maybe you have like a pod and you have someone in your pod coming and helping you as a sort of external mediator. If that's not working, then bring in people outside your pod, or bring in increasing resources. Victor?
I want to build off of that question because what came up and looking at Caleb's example of having like a several step model, the question that came up is like, like how does one know when one enters, right, the space of needing those steps? And like that question came up of like realizing that there's, I was reflecting on certain kinds of tensions that might arise for me that like, I might not have previously sort of named as like as like a conflict, right? Because I might have just sort of like viewed it as part of my own emotional landscape that like, I feel a need for this or that, or I feel threatened by in this that's like kind of situation. And might not have by default viewed that as an opportunity to engage relationally, as if it were like conflict that the group could metabolize, or that's relevant for the group. So now I'm kind of in this moment of like, all right, is conflict like any kind of tanha, right? Any sort of like tension, or like how does one? It's like I'm curious about integrating this into like a perspective that like we're always already inside of like the conditions where this might occur, and that we might just sort of be in a way that's responsive and generative.
Yeah, there's so many ways to look at that. Like what I hear you asking, Victor, is like, how do you know when it's something to address or not? And like I remember at the beginning, James was saying he sees conflict as a feeling or a nervous system state. Like if you're feeling contracted, or if you notice you're sort of avoiding someone, like you could see that your system just isn't in a relaxed state with someone. That's one way to see it. But then I also wonder, not just because you feel like that doesn't mean you have to immediately go in and address something with someone. I think Rich and Nati, when they have a few they've run some workshops before on feedback, and there was one practice or a model that they introduced, sort of a graph based on look at like how much does the relationship impact your life, like how significant is the relationship to you, and how much like impact does the conflict have, like what's something like this. I don't know if I get it right, but just having indicators of like when would you go in, or when would you decide to let it go. Yeah, there's so many ways of looking at that, but yeah, what do you even mean by conflict? When we break it down, when is it a conflict to address? When is it do we see a problem? Maybe the word conflict itself has a sort of indication of problem in it, which might be helpful or not helpful. Yeah. You know what, we are coming up to the last 15 minutes of our call, and I'd really like to get us to reflect before we end on what we're taking away. And I think something really valuable can be like, what's the next step, or what is something is there something that's popped up that you realize, oh, I'd like to like practice that, or so it could be a next step in terms of I'm going to do something differently, or maybe something you're going to like a lens you want to try on. Yeah, or some support you want to ask from someone, even from this group. Maybe we want to just take a minute to reflect on that by ourselves. Like, what's something we're taking from here that we want to take forwards, or a request for support that we might want to ask for. And just take a minute to tune in. Okay. I have one. Anybody want some more time? Okay, let's do a round and pass if you're not ready. Mine it came up around wanting to create, as I was saying, like a card as a move in my Microsolidarity card deck. As I said, there's loads of cards, but none of them really explicitly about conflicts. And I was thinking of coming up with one that's something like, who's your SOS list, like if you're for your like emergency first aid empathy listeners, like when you have tension, write down in advance who you're going to call, just like you might have a phone number on your fridge for the local doctor or the local ambulance or the fire brigade. Like, who's your list of homies that you'd reach out to for emergency support? Maybe like top 5, something like that. Could be one. Maybe I might want to challenge myself to create like 4 conflict cards that I could then share with others. That's my next step, to sort of, it's a step for synthesizing something I got from this call. Yeah. Oh, and I like the one about preparing for a conversation. I think I might make a card about that as well. Like, before you have a difficult conversation, here are 3 steps that I want to remind myself of. Like, which qualities do I want to embrace? I like that one from Caleb. And how, from a scale of 1 to 10, what's my capacity to listen to the other person if I get triggered, or how do I expect to get triggered, and what would I do if I get triggered? Something like that. Yeah. I'm gonna do that. How about you, Ondrej? Something coming up for you? Or if not, you can pass.
A few things. This whole conversation has been quite enriching. I enjoyed listening to all of you. I actually really like this last thing you shared, or one of the last things you shared, about plotting how important this relationship is for my life and how impactful is this thing on this relationship as a way of deciding whether I want to put awareness on that thing or no. And also one of the previous thoughts, like, it stayed with me, is like having this critical mass of people to role model how to handle conflict well. Like, can I work with that somehow? That especially the idea of role modeling, like, this is how you do this. And patience, cultivating patience. It's yeah, especially I wonder, like, how do I cultivate patience that lasts through a conversation when the other person attacks me, for instance. Like, that would be great. If you have any ideas, hit me up. And also one of the things which I didn't finish writing is this like helping others to build awareness of their inner states. I mean, that's quite important, actually. Like, are you aware of what is happening inside of you, or do you only become aware of it when it's too much? So how can I invite people into, like, more awareness around, okay, something's off, let's get into it before it gets out of hand, kind of thing. Cool.
Very nice. Thanks, Ondrej.
Yeah, I think for me, what stuck was this idea, thinking back to like how we can create a culture of conflict in our community more, and having times and spaces for it. We have a quarterly potluck in our member circle, and I'm thinking if there's a way that we can integrate, like, to resolve or prevent from spreading this like dark matter conflict that goes unspoken. If we can have an opportunity to either choose, like, okay, what's something that you from the past quarter that you are going to forgive, let go of, and offer forgiveness for, or where you might consider leaning into a challenging conversation. So yeah, I'm gonna think more on how we might be able to integrate that. Thanks
Love
for the
that.
inspiration.
Yeah.
Also, I'm gonna order this book that I shared with you guys because it's amazing, and I want to have a hard copy of it. I just remembered about it. It was really helpful during our more difficult conflicts.
Nice. What's the book called? The Buddha's Teachings on Social and Communal Harmony by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Oh, Bodhi. Yeah, awesome. Cool. It looks really good. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I have an extra, like, I have an Audible credit I can spend on that, so I'm totally gonna do it.
Nice.
Yeah. God, there was something present right there. What was it? I have a friend in mind, and so, like, I think I'm going to be sitting for a few minutes and, like, seeing if there's something new, to bring into a conversation with my friend.
Very exciting. Yeah. Cool. I love hearing these practical applications. Hearing each of you actually gives me also inspiration for even more cards. I think I can create a whole card deck on conflict and community next year. Another project. Anyway, thanks all for chipping in with this conversation. Could talk about conflict all day, every day, actually. And it's great to hear your, like, real lived experiences. And I imagine it's also brought up quite a lot of interesting questions or ideas for people who have been listening in. So if they listen this far, it'd be really cool to hear or see written in any comments, like which ideas struck you, or did new ideas come up for you that weren't mentioned on the call. Yeah, it'd be really cool to hear something of that. Yeah. How do you want to share, each of you, a word how you're feeling leaving the call? Myself, I'm feeling inspired and grateful for the sharing, for the shared wisdom. How about you, Victor?
Yeah, I'm feeling relaxed and appreciative, and yeah, good energy coming out of this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Ondrej, how about you?
I feel quite intrigued by all that was shared. Also quite tired at this time of the day.
It's 9 p.m. almost.
Yeah.
Thanks. Caleb?
I feel inspired also.
Lovely. Well, thanks all of you. We'll have the next call again on the first Thursday of November as well, same time. I believe it is quite likely to be, 6th of November. It's quite likely to be an online circling practice led by Michael and Aggie, who were at summer camp and created their own, well, I wouldn't say circling, but circling like practice of group presence and being with what is in a group. I really loved how they held it at summer camp and as they tweaked and evolved it together. And yeah, I think that's what will happen in the next call. So looking forward to seeing you then. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day or evening and see you next time.
Thanks, all.
Thanks, everyone.